Okay, so I understand this is now recording. So, welcome everyone to our second year running with City. It was very popular last year. It's even more popular this year. Hopefully, you'll get to understand more about how finance works, etc., at university. I know it's a very clear talk and it's very, very, very helpful. So, I will now pass you over to Kat.
Thank you, Philippa. So yeah, a huge welcome to this evening's presentation. A huge thank you for giving up your time this evening for this talk. Student finance, I know, is the biggest thing to get your head around, particularly if either you or your students, it's the first time with someone kind of going through this university process. There's a lot. So we're going to be covering that this evening. I think the easiest way for us to do this based on last year is if you have any questions, if you can just drop them in the chat as we go through, it's easiest for me to kind of keep going with the full presentation just in case I answer your questions later on. So if you can put them in the chat, that would be great. But we will have time for questions at the end, so I will pick those up. But if you think of anything as I'm going through, please just put them in the chat and then I'll pick them up at the end, or I'll maybe address them as we go through, depending on kind of if it's relevant for what I'm speaking about at the time. So I'm Kat. I work at City University of London. I work in the schools liaison team. So I talk about student finance day in, day out for my role. So this presentation is not going to be about City. This is going to be about student finance generally for English universities. So just to kind of clarify that before we get started, it's just I'm kind of here as a representative from City, but I work in partnership with Candy to kind of help students generally with this sort of topic. So hopefully my slides are moving okay, but that's the main thing. But Philippa, please stop me if not. Yes, Anastasia, sorry, I will speak a little bit slower. I do speak quite fast, so I will try and slow down. But we do have quite a lot to cover. And as Philippa mentioned, this will be recorded and it will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. You will be able to slow down my speech on YouTube. So if you watch it back, you can actually slow down the speech. So just to reassure you of that. So the three things that we're going to be covering today are talking about funding studies and what students need to be aware of when they are kind of what finance is available to them. We're going to talk about how the student loan system works in terms of what they can borrow and in terms of repayments. And then I'm also going to talk about additional support as well. That's the more fun part of my talk, but we have the sort of nitty gritty stuff to get through before then. So let's start by talking about funding your studies. So the big question that I think everyone is probably asking is, how am I as a student, or parents, you're thinking, how is my student going to be funding university? So Student Finance England administer finance on behalf of the government for students who are going to be progressing to university. And students we're going to be talking about eligibility criteria and things like that throughout today, but just to let you know, I am focusing on English universities today as I work at an English university. There are, if you're planning to go to university in Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland, typically, if you are eligible for the UK finance, you get funded as an English student for university in those countries. But if you are an EU student or an international student, then it might be that you need to look up the alternative funding sources. If you look at the Student Finance England one and think you're not eligible, it might be you are eligible for Student Finance Scotland or Student Finance Wales, etc. So when you go to university, there are two main costs that you have to find. We have tuition fees, and that's the money that you pay to the university to be a student there. And then we have living costs. So this is things like accommodation, bills, clothes, food, etc. And the good news is that for many students, Student Finance England have finance that's available to help with both of those things. Predominantly, this is in the form of a loan, and that's what we will be talking about for the majority of this evening. So it's a loan that is borrowed and paid back later in life. But there is some additional support as well, and that comes from various different sources, and we will cover that as well. And that is free money that doesn't have to be paid back. So most of the finance for university is a loan, but there is some additional funding. So we'll make sure to cover both this evening. In terms of applying for student finance, it's an online application form at gov.uk/student finance. The application is opening a little bit late this year, so it's due to open in March. It usually opens in February, but it is opening a little bit late this year. The deadline to apply is usually around the 20th of May. What we don't know at this stage is because they're opening late, they may extend the window, but we don't know for sure. So when it opens, please make sure you check when the deadline is. To be honest, I would work on the assumption it's the 20th of May. Once it's open, there's no reason for you to not apply straight away. So even students, if you're not 100% sure which university is going to be your first choice right now, because you have until like May, June time to select your top choice uni, that's absolutely fine. Put the university you hope will be your top choice. And then if for any reason that changes, even if you end up at a new university post A-level results day, that's absolutely fine. You just log into the application and switch out the universities. As long as your original application form is in on time, then everything should be okay with getting your finance on time. So even if you're not 100% sure which uni you're going to right now, like most of you probably aren't, put the uni you hope will be your top choice and then just swap it out. So really, I would apply as soon as it opens, because I just think once it's done, it's kind of out the way. There's no need for you to really wait. If you're not 100% sure that you're definitely actually going to uni this year, so if you're thinking, well, maybe I will be going to a university, I might not be going to uni, or I might take a gap year, not 100% sure, you can just cancel the application if you decide not to go. So again, put it in on time is the best advice I can give you. Students, you will fill out your section first, and we'll talk a bit about that. And then what will happen is your parents or your partners, depending on your age, and again, we'll cover that in the next few slides, will need to submit their part of the application. All of this needs to be completed within that window of time that this application is open for. So again, the sooner it opens, the sooner you apply, both your bit and your parent or partner bit can be done, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. So that is really what I would recommend. Before we start talking about the loans and things like that, I just want to say it is completely up to you whether or not you plan to take out this student loan. I would say 95% of UK students borrow this, probably. Many students don't have the kind of money upfront. I certainly didn't when I was going to university. So I have one of these student loans. It's very common to borrow the student loan, but it is up to you. It's not compulsory. If for any reason you're in a financial position that you don't need it, that's fine. You don't have to apply. Or you can just apply for part of it if you want to. You can just apply for the tuition fee loan and not apply for the bit for living costs, for example. So it is very flexible. It is up to you, but many students will apply for the full thing. So how will I know if I'm eligible for the loan? So there is eligibility criteria for this loan, and obviously these slides are being recorded, so you'll be able to pause the video when you watch it back on YouTube later on to have a look at the eligibility criteria, because I'm not going to go through it in too much detail because most of you on the call will be eligible. But if you look at the list on the screen and you think, I'm not 100% sure that I'm definitely going to be eligible, it is very, very worth reaching out to Student Finance England early to clarify it with them, because it's going to be their decision rather than individual universities' decisions whether you're eligible for the loan. And if you're not eligible, you're going to have to figure out whether university is financially doable for you, but predominantly, well, how am I going to fund that if I can't get the loan? Am I going to be eligible for big enough scholarships to make up the deficit of not being able to borrow the loan? So it is really important that if you're not sure if you're eligible, that you do reach out to Student Finance England. You don't have to have been born in the UK in order to be eligible. There are quite a lot of criteria that would mean you're eligible if you have permanent residency here or you have settled status as an EU student. If you only have pre-settled status, you're only eligible for the tuition fee loan, not the living cost part as well. But as an EU student, you might be eligible for full funding in Scotland or somewhere like that, for example. So there are different options available. You will need to do some research. If you're not sure, reach out to Student Finance England. Really important that you clarify that with them. But I am going to sort of do the rest of my talk assuming you're eligible. So I'm going to talk about the full amount that's available so that most of you who will be eligible have the full information. But just a reminder to make sure you do check. So let's talk about the first part of the loan that you can borrow. So this is called the tuition fee loan. And this is the bit that you borrow to pay the university for being a student there. So at the moment, universities can charge up to £9,250 a year in tuition fees. And as many students don't have that up front, they borrow a tuition fee loan from Student Finance England, which will help to fund those tuition fees. So The good news about this is that if you're eligible for funding from Student Finance England, you're eligible for the full tuition fee loan, even if your university charges the full 9,250 a year, which to be honest, most of them do. So as long as you're eligible for that full 9,250. So that's great. What this means is it's not dependent on your individual circumstances. So you'll see as we move through today that a lot of the rest of the finance is dependent on your household income traditionally. The tuition fee loan isn't. So the good news is as long as you're eligible for the loan, you'll be eligible for that full up to 9,250 a year. Student Finance England will transfer this money directly to the university on your behalf. So if you tick the box on your application to say, yeah, I'd like to apply for the tuition fee loan, they will sort it out directly with the university. It's not going to bypass your account because that's quite a lot of money to come into your account for you to remember to transfer to the university. They won't do that. They'll just sort it out directly for you. So all you're doing is ticking the box to say that you would like to borrow this money. Now, the key word with loan is it is borrowed money. It does have to be paid back later in life, and we'll talk about repayments in a few slides' time, but just important to keep this at your back of your mind for now. So now let's talk about the maintenance loan. This is the other major part of the finance that's available from Student Finance England. And maintenance is the word that Student Finance England use to mean living costs. So it is up to you what you spend this on. Those of you moving away from home, it's going to be on accommodation, realistically. But even if you're living at home, you might pay rent at home. Those of you that are over 25, you might just be paying generally your rent or your mortgage with some of this money. You're also paying for things like books, clothes, food, all that kind of stuff. This money is there to support you with your living arrangements. The amount of maintenance loan you will get does depend on your individual circumstances, primarily your household income, but also where you will be living while you're studying. And we're going to go through that over the next few slides. Whatever the amount is that you're entitled to, you get roughly the same amount per year. And it's divided into 3 installments per year that are paid directly to your bank account. So this is different to the tuition fee loan. It's not sent to the university. It's your money for you to choose how you want to spend it. And you'll get 3 installments, 1 in September, 1 in January, and 1 in April. This is also borrowed money, so it's going to be combined with the tuition fee loan to be what you repay later. Again, keep this in the back of your mind, but we will talk about it in a few slides' time. So how does Student Finance England decide how much money to give you? Well, it's your decision to go to university, but the criteria that they used is usually based on people around you. So students, those of you that are under 25, it is typically based on your parents' income. So if you live with both parents, it's based on their joint income. If you live with one parent, it's based on that parent's income. So the parent that you live with. But if the parent that you live with has a partner that lives with them, so for example, you live with mum and stepdad or mum and mum's boyfriend, their income is taken into consideration as well, whether they financially support you or not. Okay, so just an important thing to understand there. So have a think about now, who is your household, because this will be something we're going to need to think about over the next few slides. There are some situations for those of you under 25 where they won't look at your parental income. And I've included these criteria here. So it's things around if you've supported yourself financially, and that is quite seriously supported yourself financially for the last 3 years. You've been married or in a civil partnership before the start of your course. If you've spent at least 13 weeks in care since you've been 16. Yeah. Sorry, someone's come unmuted. If you can just make sure you're all on mute, that would be great. If you've had no contact with your parents for over a year, this means you're classed as something called an estranged student. And what that means is you have sort of no contact with your parents. If you fall into any of these criteria, then Student Finance England won't look at your parental income. And so you will class as an independent student, which will mean that it's just based on you. And even if you have a part-time job, that doesn't count for Student Finance England. So typically you will have 0 income. Okay. But for many of you that are under 25, it's based on either both parents or at least one parent or potentially a step parent. Now, I appreciate being candy. We might have some people on the call that are over 25. So if you are over 25, they won't look at your parental income. Even if you live with your parents, if you're over 25, they won't look at it. But they will look at partner's income if you live with your partner. So that's a difference there. There is lots of information on the Student Finance website about this. So if you're not 100% sure which criteria you fall into, do have a look on their website, and obviously do reach out to them if you're not 100% sure. So keep in your mind who your household income is. We're now also going to think about where you will be living while you're studying and the effect that this can have. So if you're staying living at home while you're studying, so this is if you live in your parental home, is typically what the wording is, then you can get up to £8,400 a year in maintenance loan. If you are going to be moving away from home and you're going to be living somewhere, say like Durham or Leicester or Brighton, somewhere that is outside of London, it's up to 9978. And then if you are moving to a university in London, so this is typically if you are, say, I mean, that's a bit confusing if you go to Candy because a lot of you live in London, but let's say you're not going to be living with your parents anymore. You're moving into, say, City or King's or UCL's accommodation, or you're moving out of your parental home and you're going to be renting. Then you class as that live in Greater London category, and that is up to 13,022. So you can see that there's a lot more available for London. The reason that they do that is, you know, we all here kind of either live or commute to London and understand that London is a little bit more expensive. And so Student Finance England have a bigger maintenance loan available for London, so that if you wanted to live in London uni accommodation or wanted to move out of your parental home, there is some more finance available for you to help to financially support you to do that. Okay, so now this is usually the bit that most people want from my talk. So this is the maintenance loan table, which combines those two things. So think about who your household is. If your household income is £25,000 a year and under, you will get the maximum amount of maintenance loan, whichever category you would count as. So whether that's living at home, living elsewhere, or living in London. You can see that as the household income goes up, the maintenance loan goes down until you hit the bold number, which is in a slightly different place on the table for each category. Once you hit the bold number, Student Finance England won't break it down any further than that. So for example, if you're in the live at home category and your household income is £80,000 a year, you will still get the minimum for that category, which is 3,698, but you just won't get sort of anywhere further up the table. The reason for this is Student Finance England assume that if your household income is higher, that your parents or partners will be able to financially make up the difference to effectively take you closer to the top of the table. Now, I don't want to assume that that's actually the case for anybody. It wasn't the case for me when I was at university. And so I have included some parts of this talk for my tips on how you can sort of manage your finances, additional incomes, things like that. So please don't worry, we'll talk about it. But that's just to give you the context of where this comes from. There is a student finance calculator on their website, and I'd really recommend that after this talk, you go and fill that out, because this table only gives you a guide based on those very round figure household incomes, whereas yours is probably not a round number like that. So if you put in your household income more specifically, it will give you the more specific maintenance loan, and it will also give you the sort of ideas of where you fit in that with your specific household situation. So I would really recommend doing that after this talk. So as I mentioned, the maintenance loan is coming in 3 installments. You're getting it in September, in January, and in April. You get slightly more that comes through in April because it covers the summer holidays as well. So just to let you know, that's kind of how that works. The September one sometimes is not in your bank account in time for Freshers Week, which is the sort of week where there's loads of events and loads of meeting people. So it is good if you can to save up a bit of money over the summer to pay for Freshers Week, because there's quite a lot of nights out. And even if your maintenance loan was in, you wouldn't really want to use loads of your maintenance loan on the nights out. So I'd recommend you save up a little bit of money in the summer just to help get you through that first week. So a question that I get asked a lot, and I've been doing this for a long time. I've worked at the city for nearly 7 years, and I worked in a similar role to Philippa for 3 years before that. So I've worked in this sector a long time. And a question that I get often is, well, what if things change? What if while I'm on my degree, my dad retires and his income's going to really drop and I would need more maintenance loan because his income is not the same? What happens then? Student Finance England are prepared for this, and you can at any time during your studies or after you submit your initial application, you can fill in something called a current year reassessment form. And what that is it basically, you put in your new details. So you would put in that example, dad's new income, and Student Finance England will adjust your maintenance loan accordingly because it's dropped. Now, I don't recommend you fill in this form if your household income goes up. I would only do it if your household income goes down. So that's just an important note there. But it is there to help you. If your household income drops, this system does exist. So do reach out to Student Finance. The form is available on their website and you can fill it out at any time. An important thing that I do want to note here as well, and this is a note for you parents, is that Student Finance England will base the application on the previous complete tax year, which finished last April, not this April. So they are going to base it on your salary completing, so like your P60 from last March. Okay. So if your household income has dropped since then, it is important that after you fill in the application with your last year tax information, you then fill in the current year assessment form and get it updated. But you have to put in the original one with last year's tax information. So just an important distinction there. If any of you have specific questions about that, please drop it in chat, but hopefully that kind of explains that. So students, when you're filling out your application, there are some things you will need to provide. You will need to prove your identity. So usually the easiest way to do this is if you have a UK passport, because you can just put in your passport number and the expiry date and things like that, and you don't need to physically send your passport to Student Finance England. But if you don't have that, or you weren't born in the UK, you may have to physically send something like your birth certificate or your permanent residency card or your settled status evidence, something like that, to Student Finance England. So just make sure you read that information carefully if you need to. And I highly recommend you send it recorded delivery and that you include an envelope inside that means you'll get recorded delivery back. Okay, so just would recommend that. And also don't do it right before a holiday when you're going to need those documents. You will then need to give the university details and you'll need to give the course code. You should usually be able to type those in and it will come up. So for example, if you type in city, C60, which is our code, should come up, but you can find this information in UCAS if you don't know it. And the course code is really important because at some universities, they will have similar names, but different course codes. So again, check on UCAS to make sure that you get the information matching. You need to put in your bank account details. And this is an important message that students, you will be over 18. This is your legal application. And therefore it should be your bank account details because this is your money and your loan. You can amend your bank account details at any point, and I'll give you an idea later on about why you might do that. You'll need to give your national insurance number, and then you will need to give the email addresses of the people who are supporting your application. So that's your household income people. So that might be mum and dad, that might be mum, or that might be mum and stepdad. If you're over 25, that might be your partner. So those are the email addresses that you put in, and Student Finance will prompt you to help you to do that. So a little bit of information, parents, partners, if you are supporting a student's application. The first thing to note is it is their legal application. So it's not yours. All you are doing is providing your information for the assessment for them. It doesn't legally tie you into their application. It's still theirs, but you are supporting their application. As I mentioned, you are providing your financial information from the previous complete tax year. So that's last March's P60, or your March wage slip would have your whole complete year tax year information on it. I've included a little bit of information on this slide about what counts as income that you may need to put, because I do get asked quite a lot of questions in these presentations of things like, oh, I get X type of income from this, or I maybe get some property income and things like that. It is very individual for each person's situation. So if you're not sure, please visit the link that I've put on this slide, which is to help parents and partners with supporting applications. And if you call Student Finance, they do have a parent and partner line on the phone line, so you can speak to them as well. And it's important that you do reach out to them. I can't really advise on every single situation for what income you should and shouldn't include. The information is very detailed. It includes a lot of information around benefits you would need to include and not include and things like that. So do definitely have a look on there if you're not 100% sure. So that is the main chunk, which is about the actual loan. So now we're going to talk about how the repayments work. So everything that you borrowed and that's the tuition fee loan and the maintenance loan, will get combined to be the loan that you have to repay to Student Finance England after your course. The really, really important takeaway for this is that the amount that you repay is based on your salary and not how big your loan is. Okay, so that's a really, really important distinction, because there is a lot of sort of misrepresented information in the media about the student loan. And yes, in some cases, your student loan will be quite big. If you study a degree that is 4 years, so you have a 4-year tuition fee loan, and let's say that you're moving to a university in London, your parental income is under £25,000 a year, so you're getting that like 13k a year in maintenance loan. That's a lot. That is a big loan. However, the amount that you repay is based on your salary and not how big your loan is. Okay, I know I'm saying it a lot, but it's really important because that's not something that is particularly well portrayed in the media. Okay, so that's a really important distinction. The reason that Student Finance England and the government have set the repayments this way is that it makes the repayments affordable based on your salary rather than it being focused on how big your loan is. So it means you're not sort of stressing about, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that study abroad year or the placement year on my degree because I'm worried about having an extra year of funding. So you will only make repayments when your salary is deemed high enough, and we'll talk about what that amount is on the next slide. And if you drop below that figure, your repayments will stop and it only kicks in again after that threshold. It's very linked to your salary. So Student Finance England they're pretty sophisticated in this because you've put your national insurance number in your application. And if you're employed, they will just take the repayments on your behalf. So on my wage slip, before I get paid, there's tax, national insurance, student loan. So it gets sorted out for me. So it's all done because they have my national insurance number. If you're self-employed, it's done for a self-assessment tax return with the rest of the kind of payments that you make. So you won't start making any repayments on your loan until you're earning above £25,000 a year. So if when you graduate, your income is below that figure, you don't make repayments. They will only start once you earn above £25,000 a year. And they actually don't start straight away. So you usually finish your course in July, and Student Finance England like to give you a bit of time just to settle into the working world. So they actually won't start taking any payments until April after that. So even if you are making above 25,000 in that time, that's okay. They won't start looking at it until the April after you graduate. If you do leave your degree early for any reason, just to let you know, you will have to make repayments as well, and that will start paying the year after you ended your course. So on top of this, Student Finance England actually don't look at your whole salary when they're figuring out how much the repayments should be. So they will only look at what you earn above £25,000 a year. So if you're earning 28,000, they're only looking at 3,000. They're not looking at the full 28. And then whatever you earn above 25,000, they're actually only looking at 9% of that. So that's why the repayments are so affordable based on your salary, because they're not actually looking at everything you earn. And I've got an example on the next slide where you'll be able to see that a bit more in practice. As I mentioned, if your salary drops below £25,000 a year, your repayments will stop, and they'll only start again once you go above the threshold. And that changes month by month. So let's say that typically you're under the 25,000, but then you get a bonus one month and you go above the threshold. You'll make a repayment in that month, but then it will drop again the following month. So it's very linked to your income. And so the more you earn, the more you'll repay. But if you change your job and you have less money, or for any reason you lose your job and you go back under the threshold or you drop further down, your repayments will either get smaller or stop. The repayment window lasts for 40 years. And if at the end of the 40 years you haven't paid off all of your student loan, then the rest of the remaining loan will be wiped. So that's just an important note there as well. So I've got an example here on the screen where you can get an idea of how this works. So as I mentioned, if you're earning £28,000 a year, they're only looking at the 3,000. They're only looking at what you earn above £25,000 a year. It's 9% of what you earn above 25. So in this example, 3,000 divided into 12 monthly repayments, which would be £22 a month. And you can see that the more you earn, the more you repay because it's linked to your salary. We've got some other examples here. So again, when you watch this back, pause it, look at it. If you want more information on the repayments, I would really recommend Martin Lewis. the money saving expert online. He does a lot for kind of promoting and talking about student finance and helping to demystify it. Really, really recommend his stuff. He has TV shows, he does TikToks, he's on YouTube. So I'd really recommend watching it if this is something that you're quite worried about. Martin Lewis is really good at explaining it clearly. So I'd recommend watching his stuff if you want to learn a little bit more about this. So we're going to talk about interest as well. So there is interest charged on the loan. Interest is going through a bit of a weird time for student finance because of the cost of living situation in the UK. So they've actually put a freeze on the interest. The reason that they've done that is the interest is typically linked to inflation. And obviously, inflation's got a lot bigger with the cost of living. And they felt that the interest was getting too high because of that. So they changed how they do it and they capped it at just the inflation. They used to add some percentage on top of it, but they've capped it. That cap is in place until August, at which point we are waiting for more information on what this will look like. As someone who has my own student loan, I don't personally think about the interest on my loan on a daily basis, in that, yes, it does make my loan bigger over the course of the time that I'm repaying it. However, the amount that I pay off of my student loan per month, remember that's based on your salary and not how big your loan is. So the interest doesn't affect how much I repay on a monthly basis. So that is how I personally look at this. Obviously, you students, you have to make the decision that is right for you. There will be some of you where, because this loan has interest, it maybe is against your religious beliefs to take out this loan. You may need to look at alternative funding from your own financial sources, potentially banks that kind of meet with law that is suitable to your religious interest. Some students have managed to get around this by the fact that this loan is not treated like a bank loan. It is an education loan, so it doesn't affect your credit rating. However, you do have to list it as a committed expenditure if you're applying for a mortgage, for example, but it's not treated like a bank loan. It is an education loan, so it's a little bit different. Only you can make the decision about whether this is right for you. But I just like to give my own context here as someone who's been paying back my student loan for 10 years or something at this point. It's not something I personally think about because my repayments are based on my salary and not how big my loan is. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about additional support. This is the more fun part of my talk. Let's talk about some free money that doesn't have to be paid back. So a little bit more exciting. So I do want to give some tips around budgeting and things as well, because this is something we get asked to share quite a lot. So it is good, where possible, to diversify your income streams when it comes to funding your time at university. So your maintenance loan, those of you that are applying for that, is a big part of your finances. But particularly if you're towards the bottom of the table, it's very difficult for you to necessarily be able to pay your accommodation. So we've given some ideas of kind of other ways you might be able to get some additional finance that won't affect your student loan. Your income is not what counts. So remember that. I know it's a bit odd, but you can have a part-time job while you're at uni, and that's fine, because Student Finance England is looking at the income of people around you rather than your income. So it's really common to work part-time alongside a degree. And many universities will encourage it for students to do alongside their course. That's not just because you get money, though that's an obvious benefit, but there are a lot of skills that you gain through having part-time work, which are very useful. So your university will typically advertise job opportunities. They might be in the area generally, but also might even be for the university. So while I was a student, I worked as a student ambassador for my uni, where actually I did presentations like this, and that's how I even ended up in this career. So I'm a real advocate of working on behalf of your university. Students, not all of you are going to want to do what I do, and that's totally fine. But it's more about the skills it gives you in terms of presentations and supporting your university, responsibility. I have student ambassadors that travel around the country for me to represent City. So some really cool opportunities that are a bit different to working in a shop or working in a bar. So I'd really recommend working for your university. The other plus is that it's flexible around your studies. The students that work for me only sign up when they're free. And if they're not, they don't sign up. Whereas a traditional part-time job, you have to work whether you're free or not. If you have a job now, let's say you work for McDonald's or for Waitrose, you might keep going with that. If you're going to a uni that's near home, then you can just keep going. But if you're moving away, see if you can transfer. If it's a chain, always worth asking, particularly for things like McDonald's. I've mentioned about working on site. So at City, the agency that we have that do all these things like student ambassadors and things like that is called Uni Temps. And there's quite a lot of universities that have those. So worth chatting to your unis if you're not sure to see if they have those opportunities. You may have family members who are able to give you some additional finance. As I mentioned earlier, Student Finance England do kind of expect that if you're towards the bottom of the table, but not everyone is in a position for their parents to actually have disposable income to give them. So again, part-time jobs are the big way that you will do this. Many universities and some companies also offer bursaries and scholarships, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And there are some additional parts of the student loan that you may be able to apply for as well that are separate and don't have to be paid back. So let's talk about bursaries and scholarships first. So bursaries are usually linked to personal circumstances, and a really common one is if your household income is under that £25,000 a year bracket, there are some bursaries that may be available from universities. But it could also be things like based on your postcode, based on being the first in your family to go to university, based on your background. Universities have different bursaries. It very much depends. So if you're not sure what bursaries your university that you're hoping to go to currently has, do make sure you look on their websites and see what you're eligible for. Scholarships typically are linked to academic excellence. So, for example, if you get certain grades, but they could be music scholarships, they could be sports scholarships. At City's Based Business School, we have the Black British Scholarship, which is a mixture of looking for particular grades, but also students from the Black community. So loads of different things that universities will be doing. So again, if you're not sure, look on the websites. You may be considered automatically for some of these, but not always. Sometimes you have to write a personal statement, like a shorter one, to apply for scholarships and things. And I don't want anyone missing out on free money. So please make sure you check. There may also be scholarships or bursaries available in the community as well. So it's worth doing your research, or if you are linked to any charities or anything currently, do have a look and see whether they have anything that could help support your studies. There's also some funding for any of you that are planning to study an NHS programme. So there's something called the NHS Learning Support Fund. This is a training grant of up to £5,000 per academic year that doesn't have to be paid back to support students who will be studying NHS programmes. There's also things like reimbursement for travel and covering accommodation costs and things like that. So again, I've included the link on the slide so you can read a bit more about this because it is separate to the student finance application. I've included the list of courses at City where you would be eligible for the learning support grant. That's typically nursing, midwifery, radiography, SLT, and optometry. But there are courses at other universities that we don't have at City where you would also be eligible. And then just a note, if there's anyone here who has applied for medicine is the NHS course that works slightly differently, because the course is quite long, it's 5 or 6 years. And so they actually have a mixture of the student loan that we talked about earlier and a different NHS bursary that kind of pool together to fund a medicine student. We don't do medicine at City, but medicine students, you probably know about this. But if you don't, make sure you look on your uni's website because they should explain this pretty clearly. There is also additional finance that's available from Student Finance England. This is separate to the tuition fee loan and the maintenance loan, and this is not a borrowed part of the loan. This is free money that you don't pay back. So the biggest part of this is what's called the Disabled Students Allowance, or the DSA. This is to support any study-related costs that you might have because of a mental health problem, a long-term illness, or any other kind of disability. Now, I do want to be clear that just because you have one of these doesn't necessarily mean you will get funding. Student Finance England will assess whether you need extra financial support that they can fund. If you think you meet the criteria, I really, really recommend applying, because the worst that will happen is they can't give you any funding for it. The best circumstances they can. And also, even if they can't, your university might have slightly different criteria and your application form will be shared with them. And so that means that they will kind of still be able to give you some finance, but it comes from the uni rather than from Student Finance England. There is also some funding available, particularly for those of you that are over 25, or you maybe have children that financially depend on you. Maybe you need to pay for childcare. There's extra support available for that. And there's also extra finance available if you have an adult that quite severely financially depends on you. There's also some funding available for you as well. So reach out on the student finance link, have a look on there and see what you're eligible for. If you fill out the calculator, sometimes they're able to include these as well. These parts will be opened up to you as part of the main application. So it will just say, would you like to apply for these, or do you meet these criteria? And then it'll open up those parts. So don't worry too much about it. It's available as part of the application. You'll usually be directed to apply for it as part of your main application in the case of these ones. So a couple of other things to note just around budgeting before I have a look in the chat for questions. So I really do recommend, where possible, you create a budget and stick to it. I know it is difficult to do, particularly students, if this is your first time managing this much money. For some of you, the amount of loan you get is quite big. And so it can feel overwhelming. There's a lot of really good tools online to help with budgeting, and I would really recommend that you try and do that if you can. The first term of the first year is the hardest, and then it does get easier from there. I would probably, the sort of biggest recommendation I can give you is to have 2 bank accounts when you're at university. So have a bank account that your student loan goes into, and then set up a sort of weekly direct debit to the main spending account that you use. So when your student loan goes in for the whole term, because remember, it's going in termly, it's a lot of money and it has to last you like 12 weeks. So divide the amount that you get by 12 or by like the number of weeks it needs to last for, and then set up a direct debit to pay yourself into a normal account that you use daily. I did that in my final year, and it was just much easier to manage my money that way. So that's a tip that I would give. In terms of bank accounts, I'm going to talk a little bit about this on the next slide. But students, it's just a reminder, it is your bank account that you should be using. If you're currently with a bank, then you can stay with that bank if you want to, but you may want to turn your bank account with your current bank, or open a new with a bank that has a better deal that you like more, a student bank account. Student bank accounts are specific to university students, and they have 0% interest-free overdrafts. So what that means is when you go into minus money, you won't have any additional charges or fees while you're in minus money, which you typically do in a bank account, kind of an adult bank account. So that's the difference with a university one. Now, the really important thing here is read the small print. Okay, lots of banks offer student bank accounts, and they'll all have slightly different packages. So I was at university a little while ago now, but I was with Barclays, and they had they sort of capped my overdraft at minus 200, and I had to ask to have it extended if I wanted to go beyond that. Nationwide, and these are what the examples are from here. My colleague Ross was with Nationwide, and they gave you £1,000 in your first year, 2,000 in your second year, and 3,000 in your third year. Other banks, NatWest, Santander, etc., will have different packages, and you need to pick the one that you think most works for you. I would really recommend you only use your overdraft if you have to. And ideally, you only use it. I think these are particularly useful if you think back to the maintenance loan table, where your household income is quite high, but maybe your parents don't have disposable income to help give you more finance. You may need a student bank account and to need to go into your minus money in order to pay your uni accommodation. And then with your part-time job, with your scholarships, the other things where you get income from, you build yourself back up to zero and back into positive money. That's how I would recommend using this. Ideally, you don't want to graduate in minus money, because if you do, what typically happens is the bank will then be like, great, you've graduated. This is we need you to pay this overdraft back now with fees. And so if you're at minus 3,000, that then takes a while to get out of minus 3,000 if you've got charges on top of that. So in an ideal world, you want to finish your degree in positive money. If you can't do that, it's worth looking for a bank that has what's called a graduate account. So again, I was with Barclays and I had a graduate account. So for 3 years after I'd finished my degree, I still had a 0% interest-free overdraft. So if I had been in minus money, then I would have not had any fees while I was trying to pay myself back up to zero. So different banks will have different things. Some have different offers. Santander is a really popular one because you usually get a free 16 to 25 travel rail card with them. So that is a popular one that people go with. but they're all different. They have different, things that will make it work for you or not. Again, I'm going to do a little promotion for Martin Lewis here, but every summer, he does a list of like all the different student bank accounts, and he puts forward what he thinks is the best option for different people in different situations. It's very useful. So I'd really recommend that you follow that. You can't usually apply for a student bank account until your offer goes unconditional at your university, which is typically around results day. So you've got some time to research this anyway. I mentioned earlier on that you might want to swap out the bank details on your student loan, and this is what I meant. So if you put the bank account details you have now on your student finance application, but then you open a student bank account and you want your loan to go in there, just make sure you put the new bank details on your student finance application. So that is it for my talk today. So I will go to questions in the chat first, but firstly, I just want to say a huge thank you for listening to this. I know it's a lot of information, so we really appreciate it. I've seen a lot of messages pop up in the chat about the recording. So this is being recorded. It will be uploaded to YouTube, and Philippa will make sure that this is shared with you. So please don't worry. You will be able to watch this back. And as I said, you can slow me down on YouTube. So it's worth doing that if you do want to kind of do that. It is worth you reaching out to Student Finance England if you're not sure of anything. And a reminder, the website for them is gov.uk/student finance. So I'm just going to scroll through the chat quickly and just have a quick look. I know Philippa's picked up some of the questions, so thank you, Philippa. So universal credit usually isn't taken into consideration as a kind of taxable benefit, Claudia. So if parents, you're on the call and you're worried about sort of your benefits being taken away, a lot of benefits are not taxable. But even if they are, particularly if you receive universal credit, it's unlikely that you go above the £25,000 a year threshold, and therefore your student would still get the maximum amount of funding. So hopefully that answers that question, Claudia. Yeah, and I know that Philippa answered this, but if somebody is concerned, so there was a question around if a passport has expired, can this still be accepted as proof of identity? So no, it would need to be an in-date passport, but so either you would get a new passport and use that, or you would use a birth certificate or another kind of identity instead. £25,000 a year net or gross, it's before tax. So it's the sort of like my salary at City, it would be that amount before I get my tax, my national insurance, my student loan pay, before any of that comes out. I think that there's some questions around LAC, and I think that Philip has been supporting with that. So I'll skip over those because I think that's been looked into. Yeah, the question about the web address for the student loan application is gov.uk/student finance. If you type in Student Finance England on Google, you'll find it. So don't worry. There was a question around what bursaries might be available for a student in care. This will vary by university. So in terms of the student loan, typically a care leaver will be an independent student and they'll get the full amount of maintenance loan. But bursaries and scholarships for students in those categories will be specific to the individual universities. So you'll just need to have a look at that. And I see that Philip has kindly put a link to UCAS as well. There was another question about universal credits. I think I answered that earlier on. Another question, how do they apply for maintenance loan if they're not sure if your child is staying or leaving London? Great question. Put what you think is the situation right now. So if your top choice university, you think you're moving to London, then put in that you're moving to there. Or if you think you're moving away to a university outside of London, whatever you think is your university's top choice, apply for your loan based on those circumstances. If it changes, so let's say you actually end up going to a university closer to home and commuting, when you swap in the new university, you will be asked a couple of those questions and you'll be reassessed by Student Finance England, who will then update it to then be your at-home information. Another question around are savings getting into consideration? Student savings, typically not, I would say, but parents and partners, sometimes yes, savings are taken into consideration. So just make sure that you have a look on the Student Finance website. The Student Finance website has been updated very well. When I applied to university, it wasn't as easy to use as it is now, and I've spent the last 10 years supporting students to apply for student finance. it's very clear now when it asks for things. It will be like, parents, I need your P60 that ends in this month, and they get you to confirm that like 3 times. The website's gotten so much better at helping people. So if you read carefully the application, it should help you with that. We've got another question, which is, do you apply for bursary scholarships now or after you've received your results? Which is a really great question. It will vary by university. And as I mentioned, sometimes you will be considered automatically by the university. So on your application, there is a box that says, are you happy to share your details with the university you've applied to? I would really recommend you do that if you're happy to, because if they can consider you automatically for anything, they will. But it will vary. So particularly if scholarships are grades based, they can't, some universities will need to wait until you get your results in the summer. So it does depend. Sometimes you apply now, but don't know if you've got it until later on. So it will very much vary. Another good question here, are twins or siblings taken into consideration for household income? So the actual income that you are putting on the application is parent income typically. But if you have children that live at home, the application does ask questions about how many children financially depend on you, parents. And depending on the number, sometimes they reduce your household income per child you have at home. I'd recommend the student finance calculator for that because it helps to make it clearer. But yes, if you have other children at home that you are financially supporting, it does ask some questions about that. One of the questions is, what about if you're in low income? So if your household income is low, that's typically a good thing for student finance because it means you get the maximum amount of funding. So hopefully that it will be worth that question. It's worth you going back and watching this again, because particularly if you came in late, you might have missed the first part where it shows what your household income is and how that works, because it's kind of, you can see how much finance is available. Thank you so much for all the lovely comments as well, everyone who's put those in there. So I've reached, I think, the end of the questions, but please, if you have any more questions, do put these in the chat. We've had another one. What if you have siblings that work and still live at home? So again, the income that's taken into consideration for your household will not include your siblings. So like when you're putting in who your household is, it's your parents that they're looking at, or step parents, or like mum and mum's boyfriend. They're not going to ask for your siblings' income. They also wouldn't ask for grandparents' income if they live with you as well. But your parents may give, and it depends on the individual situation, but they may give the details of your siblings for like other people that financially depend on them. So that's only really where siblings come into it. But if your siblings live at home and work and get an income, that's not really looked at as part of the application, because they're looking at parent or step parent or your parent's partner, their income, rather than looking at your siblings' income or your grandparents' income. So yeah, as a reminder, this has been recorded and it will be put up onto YouTube for you to watch back. If you do have any questions after this, I would really recommend that you reach out to Student Finance England. They have a student line and they have a parent line. So whether you're an under 25 or an over 25 student, you can obviously speak to them on the student line. And then parents and partners supporting applications, you can speak to them on the other line. They have a really helpful website where they have loads of information as well. And do fill out the student finance calculator, because even though the application isn't open until March, you can do the calculator now. So it helps to just sort of reassure you a little bit, to give you an idea of kind of what finance you might be eligible for. Thank you for the comment that said I'm as good as Martin Lewis. I really appreciate it. Thank you. As I said, I do really recommend Martin Lewis. If you haven't watched his stuff before, he has so much good information about student finance. He really demystifies it. He's on social media, he's on TikTok, he's on YouTube, he's got TV shows. Would really, really recommend him, because he's just very helpful generally, for giving information about this. I also just want to give a final reminder on behalf of Philippa that if you haven't already said or liked which campus you're here from, it's really helpful for us to know how we've supported the campuses today. So please, if you can make sure that you let us know that information in chat, that is super helpful. But if you do have any last minute questions, please drop them in the chat. But otherwise, thank you so much. We know it's you know, giving up your evening to hear me talk about student finance for an hour might not be the most fun thing you've ever done. So thank you for joining us. We do really appreciate it.
Yep, we had 95, which is
Wow,
amazing.
that is so
So I'm
amazing.
really pleased you seem to. Oh, look, a lovely heart as well. Everybody enjoyed it. As always, it's great.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody. Shipper, your question, when you watch the YouTube video back, it will help to answer that question. There's a table in there quite early on in the presentation, which helps to answer that.
So, okay, everybody, I'm going to stop the recording now.